Before we begin, I want to give a quick disclaimer. The following episode contains detailed descriptions of real-life events that may be disturbing to some listeners, including discussions of political violence, assassination, and the use of deadly toxin. Listener discretion is advised, especially for younger audiences. You know that quick sting you feel when an insect bites you? Maybe it's a bee or a wasp, just a sudden sharp pain that makes you wince. You might look down, see the little culprit, brush it away, and think, that's gonna hurt for a while, but no big deal. Now imagine you're walking down the city street of London, maybe headed to work or just minding your own business. The sun's out, people rushing by, and then, out of nowhere, you feel that familiar sharp sting. You stop expecting to see a bee or a wasp. You check your leg, but nothing. No bug, no mark, just the memory of the sting. And then you notice a man casually strolling away with the umbrella hooked over his arm. Weird, right? But you shrug it off, it's probably nothing. Hours later though, that sting, it's not going away. In fact, it's getting worse, like a slow burn creeping up your leg, radiating through your veins. At first, you tell yourself it's all in your head, but as the pain intensifies, your heart starts to race. By the time you make it to the hospital, the pain is unbearable. Now, you're lying on a hospital bed. Doctors are scrambling around you, whispering to each other, their faces tight with confusion. You try to stay calm, but something feels wrong. They run tests, blood work, scans, they're throwing everything they got at you. But every minute that passes, it's like your body is betraying you. Organs start failing one by one, but they can't figure out why. No toxins, no clear signs of trauma, nothing makes sense. And that's when Georgi Markov started to connect the dots. He's the one who felt that sting. He's the one who saw that man with the umbrella. It wasn't just a random passerby. This wasn't a freak accident. He knew it. That sting wasn't from a bee or a wasp. It was a deliberate hit. By the time Georgi Markov realized what had happened, it was already too late. Yet, Markov knew better. He tried to tell the doctors, warn them, he'd been poisoned. But no one was listening. They couldn't find any poison. But who can blame them? Who would believe that someone could be targeted with an umbrella? This wasn't some random act. The timing of it, the way it all went down, it was almost like something out of a spy novel. The date wasn't random either. September 7th, 1978 marked the birthday of Todor Sivkov, the Bulgarian dictator. The message was clear. This was an assassination designed to send a very specific signal, and the man with the umbrella was no ordinary passerby. Welcome to Coffee Cat, the podcast where we explore real-life events. I'm your host, Nanette Ilyana, and tonight we're rewinding back in time before the moment when an ordinary umbrella became the unexpected trigger that altered the course of a writer's life forever. Alright, so it's 1929 in Bulgaria. It's this quiet little suburb of Sofia called Nyashevo. It's one of those places where time seems to move so slowly you could practically hear the dust settle on the rooftops. The air is still, too still, like even the wind's bored out of its mind. But then, there's this kid, Georgi Markov, strolling through town like he's got a secret up his sleeve. You know the type, the kind that looks like they were born with an ability to talk themselves out of any mess. Markov had that air about him. Even as a kid, like he knew he wasn't going to stay in that sleepy little town forever. And you could feel it in the way he moved. Like the world around him was too small for the ideas bouncing around his head. Fast forward a bit, Markov's grown up, gone and studied industrial chemistry. Which, let's be honest, is the kind of subject that sounds like it should come with a lab coat and a lifetime supply of boredom. But not for him. No. Even while he's studying formulas and mixing chemicals, Markov's scribbling away, writing stories that could cut through the air like a cold wind. And that's when things start to get interesting. Take the roof, for example. On the surface, it's just a story about, well, a roof collapsing. Big deal, right? But oh no. This wasn't just a story about some lousy architecture. Markov was laying it on thick, using the roof as a metaphor for the whole rotten system crumbling beneath its own weight. It's the kind of thing that makes you feel the ground tremble under your feet, like you're standing in the wrong place at the wrong time, and the ceiling's about to cave in. The authorities? Yeah, they got the message loud and clear. They saw right through the metaphor, and did what they always do when someone shakes a house card. They ordered the whole thing destroyed. Manuscripts burned, pages turned to ash, like they could erase the idea by wiping up the words. Then there's the portrait of my double. And oh, this one's real mind-bender. It's all about identity and the pressure to blend in, to become the shadow of yourself, so the regime won't notice you standing out. It's like walking through a hall of mirrors where every reflection is just a little more warped than the last, until you can't tell which version of you is real anymore. Creepy, right? But for Markov, that was the reality under communist Bulgaria. Everyone's face looking the same, wearing that dead-eyed, state-approved smile. And naturally, the regime banned this one too, because nothing says we're terrified of what you're saying quite like making sure no one can hear it. By the 60s, Markov wasn't just some writer with a couple of banned books. He stayed relevant. He was still part of the Union of Bulgarian Writers, still hanging around the people who mattered, still being invited to all of the right parties. It was like the regime was trying to keep him close, but not too close, as if they were afraid he'd set the whole house of cards on fire if they let him go. For a while, Markov had it good, living that charmed life where you're just rebellious enough to be dangerous, but not quite rebellious enough to be dead. He had his foot in two worlds, one in the glamorous life of theater and television, the other in the shadowy world of banned books and dangerous ideas. And the regime, well, they were playing this weird game of cat and mouse, giving him just enough freedom to feel important, but not enough rope to hang them all with. But here's the thing about cracks in the system. You can only ignore them for so long. And once Markov started seeing those cracks, he couldn't unsee them. His writing changed, like a slow building storm. At first, it was all whispers, the kind of writing that makes you feel uneasy, like something's lurking just out of sight. But then, he started pushing harder, digging deeper. And the tension, oh, it was there. You could almost taste it in the air, like a storm about to break, all dark clouds and electricity that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. And Markov, he wasn't backing down. He leaned into it, knowing full well that one wrong move could send everything crashing down around him. This wasn't a battlefield with tanks and gunfire. This was the Cold War. It was more like a global chess match where the stakes were sky high, and every move had to be carefully calculated. On one side, you had the US and its allies, and on the other, the Soviet Union, a superpower with its tentacle deep in Eastern Europe, gripping countries like Bulgaria. The Soviet Union didn't just have an army to maintain control. They had something even more powerful, something much more frightening, the KGB. Now, think about the KGB like the CIA and FBI rolled into one, but with way fewer rules and way more reach. The job? To keep everything under control, whether that was spying on citizens or getting rid of anyone who even thought about rebelling. Home, abroad, everywhere their interests lay. They make sure the Soviet influence remained, and this is where Bulgaria comes into play. In the 1960s and 70s, Bulgaria wasn't just another country in the Eastern Europe. It was practically the Soviet Union's little brother. Its leader, Todor Sivkov, was fiercely loyal to the Soviets, and loyalty came with a prize. For Sivkov, the prize was keeping Bulgaria in line, making sure no one rocked the boat. He wasn't just a figurehead, he was deeply tied to the Soviets, and his main job was ensuring that the balance of power remained exactly as it was. Now, to keep everything running smoothly, Bulgaria had its own version of KGB, the KDS, which stands for Committee for State Security. These guys were no joke. Modeled after KGB and trained by the Soviets themselves, the KDS was tasked with making sure nobody stepped out of line. And just like the Soviet counterparts, they didn't mess around. If someone started getting too loud, too bold, too critical of the regime, the KDS made sure they wouldn't be a problem for long. Think about it. This was an era where stepping out of line wasn't just risky, it could be deadly. Even speaking your mind could get you noticed, and not in a good way. The KDS wasn't just watching, they were listening, waiting, ready to silence anyone who posed a threat to the government's control. They had a way of making people disappear, sometimes quietly, sometimes with a bang, but always effectively. Georgi Markov is leaving Bulgaria. At least, that's the story everyone's heard. The reason? Tuberculosis treatment abroad. Which, yes, is technically true, but it barely scratches the surface. This journey is the first act in his careful orchestrated plan to break free. But calling it escape feels misleading. He's not running away. He's making a calculated decision. You see, Markov was suffocating, not just from the TB that had been choking his lungs, but from the Bulgarian regime that had been choking his words, his thoughts. They'd been keeping him on a leash. And yet, he was still there, still playing the game, trying to breathe in a country that refused to let him catch his breath. This trip to get better wasn't just about healing his body. It was about seeing if there was a life beyond the suffocating grip of the regime. And then he steps off that plane abroad Imagine this, he spent years living under a blanket of fear, watching every word he writes, every conversation he has, knowing that any wrong move could land him in trouble. And now, he's in a place where people are talking, not whispering, not coding their words in fear, but talking freely about politics, art, the world. It must have hit him like a slap in the face. This wasn't just a different country. This was a different world. He's sitting in a cafe, sipping in his coffee, hearing people argue about politics like it's no big deal. There's no lowering of voices, no scanning the room for state informants, just talking. Imagine how bizarre that must have felt for a man like Markov, who had been forced to measure every single word he'd ever said or written. It wasn't just liberating, it was overwhelming. He must have been thinking, how can I go back? How could he ever go back to a place where words were weapons, where every conversation had the potential to ruin you? This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment decision, though. Markov didn't land in the foreign country and suddenly decided, this is it, I'm done. No, the idea had been simmering for a long time. He'd been growing more and more disillusioned with the Bulgarian communist regime, watching the cracks in the system grow larger and larger. He'd written about it too, in ways that were clever enough to get past the censors, most of the time. But now, sitting in this cafe, hearing people speak freely and seeing art and literature that weren't controlled by the state, it was like everything clicked into place. He wasn't going back. But here's where the story gets heavier. Leaving Bulgaria wasn't just about gaining freedom. It was about losing everything else. Markov wasn't a fool. He knew what this would mean for his family and friends back home. The regime had a way of making sure that when people defected, the people they left behind felt it hard. If they couldn't get to Markov, they'd go after the people he cared about. The Bulgarian government, like many Soviet-backed regimes, used intimidation, harassment, and persecution to punish the family of defectors. For example, close relatives might suddenly lose their jobs or be denied career advancements. The KDS could put them under constant surveillance, or worse, interrogate them and pressure them to denounce their loved ones as traitors. Life for the families of defectors could become socially isolated as well. Friends and neighbors would distance themselves out of fear of being associated with a traitor, and children might even face bullying or discrimination in schools. In some cases, defectors' family members were banned from traveling abroad as a form of collective punishment to keep them from reuniting with their loved ones. The guilt must have weighted on Markov like an anchor. Even if he tasted freedom for the first time, imagine knowing that your choice for freedom would make life harder for everyone you love. It's a kind of burden that never really goes away. Then there's the official reaction from Bulgaria. For them, this wasn't just some writer leaving. This was personal. Markov was one of their own, one of the most prominent intellectuals. His defection was a slap in the face, an insult they couldn't let slide. So what did they do? They slapped him with 6.5 years prison sentence for treason. A sentence he never served, of course, because by the time they passed it, Markov was long gone. That sentence wasn't for him. It was for everyone else, a message. You leave? We destroy you. And for those who dare return after defecting, the consequences were severe. Some defectors who attempted to come back faced immediate arrest. The regime would often subject them to public trials, labeling them as traitors and enemies of the state. For example, many returnees were either imprisoned or, in more extreme cases, executed. The secret police would extract confessions under duress, often through torture, and use them as propaganda tools to showcase the just punishment of those who betrayed the motherland. It's a bittersweet kind of freedom, the kind that comes with a heavy dose of loss. Markov had won, in a way. He had escaped. He had outwitted the regime. But in doing so, he had lost something that could never be replaced. London. The air was damp. The sky was muted gray. But to Georgi, it felt like the first breath of real freedom he'd had in years. As he stepped out of the plane, there was no rush, just a quiet sense of release. For once, the words he spoke would be his own, and he was ready to tell the world what he had kept locked away for so long. Markov started writing these in absentia reports, sending them out through Radio Free Europe and the BBC, which were broadcasted everywhere, even straight into the heart of Bulgaria. And these weren't your average, things are bad here, reports. Oh no, this was what people in Bulgaria knew, but couldn't say out loud. Markov was the guy shouting from the rooftops what everyone else could only whisper. It's like standing in a crowded room, and everyone's thinking the same thing, but too scared to say it. And then Markov walks in, takes a deep breath, and just lets it all out. He wasn't subtle either. He talked about fear in a way that made you feel it crawling up your spine. He said, We are all prisoners of an invisible cage. Our chains are not of iron, but of fear. And that's it, isn't it? Fear wasn't just something that haunted people at night. It was their morning coffee, their dinner conversations, their bedtime lullabies. It was everywhere. Imagine you're stuck in a never-ending nightmare where you wake up every day in the same room, the same situation, the same suffocating fear. And the worst part is, you stop even dreaming of an escape because hope's been sucked out of you like the last bit of air in a vacuum-sealed bag. It's like one of those terrible carnival rides you can't get off. You're going around, and the lights are flashing, and the music's blaring, and the first thing you think is, okay, this will end soon. But it doesn't. And then you realize you're trapped in this ride forever. Every day, the same thing. That's what Markov was talking about. It wasn't just a bad day at the office. It was your life being scripted by someone else, and the script never changes. And you want to know the real twist? It wasn't just the government that made you feel this way. No, Markov knew it went deeper. The fear wasn't just top down, it was sideways too. You couldn't trust anyone, your neighbors, your colleagues, heck, even your family. Markov described it like living in a house of mirrors, where every reflection is distorted, and you can't tell which one is real. You're constantly second-guessing every look, every word. Is that person smiling because they mean it? Or are they about to report you for saying something slightly off script? Markov summed it up when he said, "Words are not our own. They are lent to us, borrowed from the pages of the party's holy book." Now, let that sink in. Imagine living in a world where your entire vocabulary is rented out to you. It's like every conversation is being edited in real time by some unseen producer, and you're just mouthing the lines they've handed to you. Think about how exhausting that would be. You can't even say, "Oh, I'm having a tough day," because that might be interpreted as, "I'm dissatisfied with this glorious party." And boom, you're in trouble. It's like being trapped in one of those TV infomercials where everyone is unnaturally happy, waving around their new miracle gadget. You know, the ones where they're grinning ear to ear, chopping vegetable like it's the greatest moments of their lives. Except in this world, if you don't smile along, you're done for. That's what Markov was living, and he made sure people understood just how deep that control went. And the arts? Don't even get Markov started on how the regime hijacked creativity. He said, "They had turned our poets into court jesters, our artists into puppets, and our thinkers into silent conspirators." Imagine a painter being told what colors to use, a poet being handed a script, a magician being given a list of approved notes. It's like going into a symphony where every instrument is forced to play the same note over and over, and everyone is clapping like it's the most beautiful thing they ever heard. You're sitting there looking around thinking, am I the only one who's realizing this is all fake? It's like going into a magic show, except you can see all the strings, all the trapdoors, all the sleigh of hands. You see the wires lifting the magician's assistant, but everyone else is still oohing and eyeing like it's the real deal. And the worst part, you have to clap along because if you don't, if you so much as raise an eyebrow, the spotlight's going to land on you. And Markov was the guy saying, "Look, I see the strings. Do you?" But the real gut punch? Markov saved that for the elites. He had seen them up close, and when he wrote about them, it was with a kind of furious clarity that made you sit up straight. He said, "In the grand halls of the party, they speak of people sacrifice, of glory over collective labor, but behind closed doors, they feast on caviar, toast with champagne, and laugh at the very people they claim to serve. It's like being at a buffet where the chefs tell you there's only bread and water, and then you catch a glimpse behind the kitchen door and see them eating filet mignon and chugging fine wine. They talk about sacrifice, but they don't even know what that word even means." Markov had been to those parties. He'd seen the champagne, the caviar, the smug smiles. So when he called them out, he wasn't just making noise, he was pulling the curtain back on their little game. And that's why the regime hated him so much. He wasn't just criticizing them, he was exposing them. And of course, they didn't like that one bit. Markov knew he was in their crosshairs, but instead of running, he kept writing. He knew the risks, but he said, "I have long made peace with the fact that my words may outlast me." It's like being the whistleblower in a conspiracy movie, and instead of sinking off into the shadows, you're standing in the middle of the street, waving your arms, daring them to come for you. As his reports went on, they got sharper, more urgent. Markov wasn't just writing anymore. He was shouting from the rooftops. He said, "We are all prisoners, even if we no longer see our chains. Our cage is invisible, but it is no less real." It's like realizing you've been living in a zoo your whole life, but the bars are so well disguised you didn't even know they were there. The horror wasn't just in the oppression, it was in how normal the oppression had become. Markov's words weren't just criticism of the regime, they were a lifeline. He was reaching out to the people still trapped inside, letting them know they weren't crazy, they weren't alone, and that the system wasn't as solid as it seemed. His voice was a hammer tapping at the cracks in the walls. And in the end, those cracks, they couldn't be ignored. Even after they silenced him, his words kept echoing. Have you ever had one of those mornings where everything feels just right? You wake up, the world's in its place, and your routine is like a well-rehearsed dance. Get up, stretch, coffee, news. The kind of day where nothing is out of the ordinary. You don't even think about it, really. It's almost comforting how predictable it is. But you know how it goes. The worst days, the ones that truly change everything, they always start out normal. Just like that. That's how it was for Georgi Markov on September 7th, 1978. Just another Thursday in London, or so it seemed. Markov had his rhythm down. A life of exile, sure, but it had its comforts. His flat in London, the early morning cup of coffee, a quick scan of the headlines, you know the drill. Skim just enough to feel informed, enough to shake your head at the state of the world, then move on. He had a broadcast to get ready for, work to do. He might have tossed a jacket over his shoulder as he headed out the door, barely noticing the crisp autumn chill that was sneaking in. But here's the thing. You never notice the moment right before everything changes. London was its usual self, busy, fast, loud. The kind of place where you're just another face in the crowd. The streets were bustling, full of people rushing somewhere, heads down, lost in their own world. And Markov, he was right there with them, probably rehearsing the day's broadcast in his head as he walked. You know how it is when you're so caught up in your own thoughts that the world around you becomes background noise? That was Markov, head full of work, nothing unusual. But life has a way of interrupting, doesn't it? It happened in an instant. He was just standing at the bus stop, waiting, when he felt it. A sharp sting in his thigh. You know that feeling? Like when someone pokes you with an umbrella just enough to make you wince, but not enough to think twice? It was probably one of those what the moments, quick passing. He might have rubbed his leg, looked around, but shrugged it off. It's a crowded city after all. People bump into you all the time. It was London, for crying out loud. No reason to think much of it. We're all brushing off weird things. Markov likely kept moving, not giving it a second thought, as he made his way to the BBC just like he always did. And it was business as usual. Meetings, recordings, discussions about the day's political topics. Nothing was out of place, except the egg in his leg. It stuck around. At first, it was the kind of thing you ignore, like when you twist your ankle and it nags at you all day, but you tell yourself it's fine, just a little discomfort. He probably figured it would go away, but then a fever started to creep in. You know that feeling, right? When you can sense the flu coming on? That slow sinking worm that spreads through your skin, like someone cranked the thermostat up just a notch too high? Markov must have felt in the back of his neck, the kind of sensation that makes you loosen your collar a bit, roll your shoulders, maybe think, oh, not today. But he wasn't the type to let it slow him down. He pushed through. He had work to do. By the afternoon, though, things were different. He wasn't just dealing with a leg ache anymore. His whole body felt heavier, like someone had strapped weight to his limbs. His head, foggy, sluggish, as if it had been stuffed with cotton. You know the feeling, like your brain is wrapped in a damp blanket. His muscles were stiffening, his thoughts slower. But he was a man who'd seen worse. He wasn't one to let a little sickness stop him. He probably figured a night of rest would do the trick. After all, what else could it be? Just a long day, he might have thought. I'll be fine. But here's where the day starts to spiral, where everything goes from just a normal Thursday to something else. That night, things didn't improve. In fact, they got much worse. What started as a mild egg in the morning had now turned into something far more sinister. His body felt like it was shutting down, piece by piece. You know how it is when the flu hits hard, when it's not just discomfort but real pain. His muscles felt like they were being twisted from the inside. Nausea hit him in waves, sharp and unrelenting. The fever, it was spiking now. His body was drenched in sweat. It was like his body was burning from the inside out, and no amount of tossing and turning could cool him down. His sleep was restless, more like a series of fevered dreams than actually rest. By morning, it was clear something was wrong. His wife, Annabelle, must have seen it in his face, the way he moved, slow, stiff, pained. She insisted they go to the hospital, her voice calm but filled with worry. Annabelle wasn't one to back down, not after everything they had been through. They had met after Georgi defected. He had left Bulgaria behind and found a new life in London. Their paths crossed during Markov's work in the BBC World Service. Annabelle was British, an intelligent and creative woman. The two formed a deep connection, sharing not only intellectual curiosity, but also the weight of living with the consequences of his defection. Annabelle stood by him through the difficulties that came with speaking out against the regime that didn't forgive or forget. Now, years later, their daughter Sasha, just a little girl, stood in the doorway, clenching a toy, watching her father with wide eyes. Confused, she could tell something wasn't right, but couldn't yet understand the gravity of it. Annabelle was firm, determined not to let him brush it off like he had with so many other things. Markov, weakened, sweating, and disoriented, couldn't argue. He knew deep down that something serious was happening. For once, he had no choice but to lean on Annabelle's strength, as he had done so many times before. At the hospital, the doctors did what they could. They saw the fever, the rapid pulse, the clear signs of distress. They ran the tests, and the results were adding up. Sure, his white blood cell count was elevated. Maybe there was an infection, but where? How? They couldn't find the source. His organs were starting to shut down. The liver, the kidney, one by one, they were failing, but the doctors didn't know why. It was as if his body was unraveling, but no one could figure out what had pulled the thread. And the whole time, as he lay there, sweating and writhing in pain, a single thought kept circling in Markov's mind. The umbrella. It had to be the umbrella. He remembered that fleeting moment at the bus stop, that jab in his leg, the stranger who brushed past him. It seemed so small, so insignificant at the time, but now it was the only thing that made sense. He tried to tell the doctors. Between waves of pain, he probably said something like, "I think I've been poisoned." But how do you explain something like that without sounding paranoid? Poisoned in the middle of London by an umbrella? It sounded absurd. Even the doctors probably thought, sure, okay, nodding politely. After all, they didn't have a frame of reference for what was happening. How could they? This wasn't a regular case. The doctors tried everything they could think of, fluids, antibiotics, but nothing was working. His organs were shutting down like lights flickering out one by one in a house losing power. The doctors were scrambling, trying to save him, but it was as if his body was on a timer and no one knew how to stop it. By the end, Markov was barely coherent. His once sharp mind was dulled by the relentless fever and pain. His breath grew rapid, shallow, every breath a struggle. You can imagine the scene, his body burning up, sweat soaking the sheets, the doctors around him helpless, unsure of what they were even fighting. And on the night of September 11th, 1978, just a few days after the sting in the leg, Georgi Markov's fight came to an end, just like that. Have you ever noticed how death doesn't always come with a big dramatic entrance? No flashing lights, no thunderous music. Sometimes it just strolls in quietly, like it's been in the room the whole time and you never even noticed. It's not always the grand, sweeping exit people think it'll be. Sometimes it's in the small things, the forgettable moments, the ones that slip by unnoticed until it's far too late. The post-mortem examination comes around, and doctors are thinking, maybe it's one of those rare infections that show up in the medical journal once every 20 years. You know the type, some obscure thing from a far-off land that medical students panic about during exams. But no. This wasn't some bizarre exotic disease. And here's where things start getting strange. No sign of toxic exposure either. You'd expect something obvious like cyanide or arsenic, the usual nasty suspects, to pop up. But no, toxicologists ran their test and came up empty. At this point, the whole situation is getting a little weird. Even for seasoned forensic pathologists, if it wasn't an infection and it wasn't a standard poison, what the hell was it? And then, finally, they start thinking about the one clue Markov himself mentioned, the weird sting he'd felt in his leg. You remember that? A casual jab at the bus stop? But still, it didn't make any sense. Who gets poisoned through a sting at a bus stop? How do you even connect those dots? And more importantly, why wasn't there any trace of poison in his system? Well, it wasn't until the postmortem that the real bombshell dropped. That's when they found it, the pellet. Tiny, barely noticeable, but there it was, lodged in his leg like a sinister little secret. That's when everyone sat up straight. This wasn't some freak accident or illness, no. This was cold, calculated, and deadly. The doctors suddenly found themselves in the middle of a real-life spy novel. So they started examining this pellet under the microscope. And wouldn't you know it, it's not just a piece of random metal. This thing was engineered. 2 tiny holes drilled into it, designed to release something lethal. The kind of craftsmanship that doesn't come out of your average workshop. No, this was built to kill. But what poison could do the job so efficiently and disappear without a trace? Cue the toxicologist to the rescue. Armed with their knowledge of poisons, most of us would rather not think about. At first, they're ruling things out one by one. It's not cyanide, not arsenic. Then comes the eureka moment, ricin. It's not the most common poison, but it's lethal, precise, and this is the kicker. It doesn't leave a trace after a few days. It's like the ghost of poisons. But the time it's done its job, it's already gone, leaving doctors scratching their heads. That's what made it such a perfect weapon for assassination. Hard to detect, deadly in tiny amounts, and back then, nearly impossible to counter. Now, you're probably wondering, what the hell is ricin? Well, think of it like a microscope hitman. It sneaks into your body, whether you breathe it in, swallow it, or, in Markov's case, get injected with it. And it heads straight for your cells. Imagine every cell in your body has its own little factory that keeps things running smoothly. It walks right into the factory and shuts it down through a wrench in the gears and grinds everything to a halt. No more protein production, no more functioning cells, and once your cells stop working, well, it's game over. First, you feel like you're coming down with the flu. Fever, nausea, the general sense of, I'm dying. But here's the twist. You actually are dying fast. Your organs start to shut down, your liver, kidney, even your heart. It's like your body's being unplugged piece by piece. And once it starts, there's no way to stop it. Doctors can try to manage the symptoms, but there's no reversing ricin once it is on your bloodstream. It's like getting hit by a runaway train in slow motion, and the worst part, it only takes a few grains of that stuff to kill you. The pellet in Markov's leg sealed the case. 2 tiny holes specifically designed to release ricin. Forensic experts took one look and knew they were dealing with something sinister. This wasn't just a random bit of metal someone found lying around. No, this was purpose-built. A cold-blooded, sophisticated weapon designed to kill in the most discreet, undetectable way possible. They started comparing it to the Cold War assassination techniques, and they were able to link it to one particular poison, ricin, the very same poison that the Soviet Bulgarian intelligence services were known to use. But wait, there's more. As if Markov's case wasn't chilling enough, it turned out he wasn't the first target. Another Bulgarian defector, Vladimir Kostov, had narrowly escaped a similar fate in Paris. Same method, same ricin palette, except Kostov survived, giving investigators another piece of the puzzle. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was part of a coordinated campaign by the Bulgarian secret police, with more than a little help from the Soviet KGB. Markov and Kostov were both thorns in the regime's side, outspoken critics. Markov, however, wasn't so lucky. His assassination became one of the most infamous examples of Cold War espionage. But here's the thing, it wasn't the only one. The Soviets and their allies were practically inventing new ways to kill people without leaving a trace. From cyanide-tipped bullets disguised as cigarette cases to lipstick pistols that could fire a single deadly shot. And then there was this infamous heart attack gun, which fired a toxic lace dart that dissolved without a trace. They didn't just want you dead, they wanted it to look like you died of natural causes. And let's not forget the radioactive poisoning, like the later case of Alexander Litvinenko, who was taken out with polonium-210, a radium that made him suffer for weeks before it finally killed him. It's like the Cold War had a whole underground industry devoted to creative, undetected murder. In the end, the discovery of the tiny pellet in Markov's leg, a tiny, almost invisible device engineered to deliver death, was a harsh reminder of just how far Cold War intelligence agencies would go to eliminate their enemies. It wasn't just about silencing dissent. It was about doing it in a way that sent a message that said, we can get you anywhere, anytime, and no one will ever know it was us. If it resonated with you, share it around. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories from Coffee Cat. And I'll leave you with the words of Georgi Markov himself, from The Truth That Killed. We have seen how personality vanishes, how individuality is destroyed, how the spiritual life of a whole people is corrupted in order to return them into a listless flock of sheep. Until we meet again, remember, some mysteries brew deeper than you think. Bye!